The document she held in her trembling hand weighed less than an ounce. But Senator John Kennedy knew it might as well have been a sledgehammer, because what was printed on that single page was about to shatter Ilhan Omar's entire world. He didn't smile when he saw her enter the Senate chamber that morning in March 2019. Didn't acknowledge the small army of progressive activists who'd shown up to support her, their signs already prepared, their chants already rehearsed. He simply sat there, fingers steepled, watching as she made her way to the witness table with the kind of confidence that comes from believing you're untouchable. She believed it. You could see it in the way she carried herself, in the practiced defiance of her expression, in how she barely glanced at the senators arrayed before her. Ilhan Omar had survived worse than this. Refugee camps in Kenya, poverty in Minneapolis, a contentious election where her past had been weaponized against her. She'd weathered every storm, emerged stronger, more celebrated. Time magazine covers, speaking tour, a devoted base that treated her like a prophet. What was one more congressional hearing? What was one more old white senator with questions she'd already answered 100 times before? She had no idea that Kennedy hadn't just prepared for this hearing. He'd spent 9 months building a case. 9 months cross-referencing public records with private documents, immigration files with bank statements, social media posts with sworn testimony. 9 months working with investigators who specialized in financial crimes, immigration fraud, and foreign influence operations. 9 months constructing not an attack, but a prosecution. And now, as Omar settled into her chair, arranged her notes, and looked up at him with that same defiant expression she'd worn on 1,000 magazine covers, Kennedy reached for his water glass, took a slow sip, set it down with precise, deliberate care. Then he opened the first folder. "Representative Omar," he said, his Louisiana drawl making her name sound like a 3-syllable indictment. "Thank you for joining us today. I know you're a busy woman. Lot of foreign officials to meet with, lot of campaign funds to distribute, lot of marriages to navigate. So I appreciate you making time." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the gallery. Omar's lead attorney, a man named David Schultz who charged $800 an hour and looked worth every penny, leaned forward. "Senator, my client is here voluntarily to address these baseless." Kennedy held up one finger. "Just one." Schultz stopped talking. "Mr. Schultz, I appreciate your presence. Truly do. But I'm going to need you to let your client answer the questions herself. See, she's a member of Congress, elected by American citizens, paid by American taxpayers, takes an oath to American values. So when I ask her questions about potential violations of American law, I expect her to have the courage to answer them directly, not hide behind expensive lawyers who bill by the minute." He turned his attention back to Omar. "Now, ma'am, I want to start with something simple, just to establish some basic facts. You came to the United States as a refugee in 1995, is that correct?" Omar nodded. "Yes." "From Somalia via Kenya, where you'd spent several years in a refugee camp?" "Yes." "And America took you in, gave you and your family asylum, safety, opportunity, the whole American dream package." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "America gave me the same opportunity it gives to all refugees who—" "I'm going to stop you right there," Kennedy interrupted gently, "because I want to make something clear. I'm not attacking you for being a refugee. Lord knows this country was built by people fleeing worse places. My own ancestors came here with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a dream of something better. So your refugee status, that's not what we're here to discuss. What we're here to discuss is what you did after America gave you that opportunity." He pulled out the first document, held it up. "This is your marriage certificate to Ahmed Abdizalan Hiasi. Faith-based ceremony 2002. You were, what, 19 years old? That's correct. And you had 2 children with Mr. Hiasi, lived with him, presented yourself as his wife?" "Yes." Kennedy set down that document and picked up another one. "Then in 2008 you divorced him. Or more accurately, you separated from him. Can't actually divorce from a faith-based marriage in the legal sense, but you ended the relationship, split up the household, went your separate ways. My personal relationships are public record, ma'am, especially when they involve potential federal crimes." He said it so pleasantly, like he was discussing the weather. "So you separate from Mr. Hiasi in 2008. 2 children together, relationship over, moving on with your life. Standard stuff. Happens every day in America. No judgment from me." He paused, But then something interesting happens in 2009, February 2009 to be specific. You marry a man named Ahmed Nursaid Elmi, British citizen, student visa holder, and according to these immigration records I have right here, a man who entered the United States just 3 weeks before you married him. The room got very quiet. Omar's expression didn't change, but her attorney shifted in his seat. Kennedy continued, his voice still conversational, still pleasant, but with an edge now. An edge like a scalpel. Now, ma'am, I'm a romantic at heart. I believe in love at first sight. I believe in whirlwind romances. But I've also been married for 38 years, and I can tell you something I learned in that time. 3 weeks isn't long enough to know if someone puts the toilet seat down, much less if you want to spend your life with them. He laid out another document. But here's what's really interesting. These are property records from Minneapolis. Public records, anyone can access them. They show that from 2009 through 2011, you lived at 2629 11th Avenue South. Nice apartment by all accounts. Another document. And these records show that Ahmed Elmi, your husband, lived at 3148 Cedar Avenue South. Different building, different neighborhood, different postal code. Kennedy looked up at Omar. Ma'am, I've heard of couples needing space. My wife sometimes needs space from me, usually when I've been talking about the Internal Revenue Code for more than 15 minutes. But separate apartments in separate neighborhoods while you're newlyweds, that's not space. That's just separate lives. Omar started to speak, but Kennedy was already pulling out more documents. Bank statements now, dozens of them. These are your joint bank account records with Mr. Elmi, required by law to be preserved and obtained through proper legal channels, so before your attorney objects, yes, we have the right to examine them. He flipped through pages. Deposits, withdrawals, transfers, all the usual financial activity of a married couple sharing their lives. Except, look at these addresses on the statements. Mailing address for you, 11th Avenue. Mailing address for him, Cedar Avenue. Different addresses on the same joint account. Kennedy set down the statements and picked up what looked like school enrollment forms. These are even more interesting. These are the enrollment records for your children during the years 2009 through 2011, the years you were legally married to Mr. Elmi. Want to guess what address is listed as their primary residence? He didn't wait for an answer. Cedar Avenue. Your children lived at your husband's address, the husband you weren't living with, while you lived at a completely different address. Now, ma'am, I'm no expert on modern relationships, but that seems less like a marriage and more like a very complicated babysitting arrangement. The gallery was silent now. Even the activists who'd come to support Omar seemed uncertain, their prepared chants forgotten. Kennedy pressed on. But wait, it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. These are Mr. Elmi's immigration documents, his application for adjustment of status, his work authorization forms, his applications for various benefits and extensions. Kennedy spread them out like a card dealer showing a winning hand. Every single one of these forms lists you as his spouse, lists your marriage as the basis for his claim to remain in the United States. Your marriage is the foundation of his entire legal presence in this country. He leaned back. So let me see if I understand this correctly. You marry a British citizen 3 weeks after he arrives in the United States on a student visa. You immediately begin the process of adjusting his immigration status based on your marriage. But you don't live together. Your children live with him, but not with you. You maintain joint bank accounts, but separate residences. You present as married for immigration purposes, but live as separated for all practical purposes. Kennedy removed his glasses, polished them slowly. Ma'am, I spent 9 months investigating this. 9 months looking for an innocent explanation. 9 months hoping I'd find evidence that proved this was all just a complicated misunderstanding. Want to know what I found instead? He didn't wait for an answer. I found that Ahmed Nursaid Elmi is your brother. The explosion of sound in the chamber was immediate. Shouts, gasps, the bang of a gavel trying to restore order. Omar shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. Her attorneys were up too, objecting, demanding retractions, threatening lawsuits. Kennedy just sat there, waiting for the chaos to subside, that small smile never leaving his face. When the room finally quieted enough for him to speak, his voice was soft but carried to every corner of the chamber. These are DNA records obtained through proper legal channels from databases that Mr. Elmi voluntarily submitted to as part of his immigration process. These are birth records from Somalia, verified by multiple sources. These are school records from Kenya showing both of you enrolled as siblings. These are witness statements from people who knew your family in Mogadishu, in the refugee camps in Minneapolis. He laid them out, one after another. Ahmed Nur said Elmi is your biological brother, and you married him to commit immigration fraud. You used your status as an American citizen to bring your brother into the country illegally by disguising your relationship as a marriage. That's not a complicated personal life, ma'am. That's a federal crime. Omar was still standing, her hands gripping the edge of the table. These are racist conspiracy theories that have been. Ma'am, Kennedy's voice cut through her denial like a knife. DNA isn't racist. Birth certificates aren't conspiracy theories. Immigration records aren't right-wing talking points. These are facts, documented, verified, cross-referenced facts, and they all point to the same conclusion. He stood up now too, matching her. You committed marriage fraud. You violated immigration law. You made false statements on federal documents, and you did it all while presenting yourself as a champion of immigrants and refugees. His voice got harder. You used the very system that gave you refuge, that gave you opportunity, that gave you a chance at the American dream, and you corrupted it. You defrauded it. You made a mockery of every legitimate refugee, every legitimate immigrant, every person who came to this country the right way and played by the rules. Kennedy gathered his papers. Immigration fraud carries a penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison and denaturalization proceedings. Making false statements to immigration officials carries up to 10 years per count. Conspiracy to defraud the United States government carries up to 5 years. He looked directly at Omar. I count at least 7 separate false statements on federal immigration documents, all signed by you, all sworn under penalty of perjury, all provably false. The room was dead silent. Omar slowly sat back down, her attorneys huddling around her, whispering frantically. Kennedy returned to his seat. But that's just the first folder, ma'am. I've got 6 more. So I suggest you get comfortable because we're going to be here a while. And he reached for the second folder, this one marked with red tabs. Campaign finance. The look on Omar's face suggested she knew exactly what was coming next. And that's when everyone watching realized this wasn't just a hearing. This was a systematic destruction of a congressional career, delivered with Southern charm and backed by an avalanche of evidence that couldn't be denied, deflected, or explained away. Hit that subscribe button because what Kennedy revealed next would make everything you just heard look tame. Kennedy opened the second folder with theatrical slowness, like a magician building suspense before the final reveal. But there was nothing magical about what came next, just cold, hard numbers. Representative Omar, let's talk about love, because I'm a romantic and I believe in love. I believe people can find their soulmates in unexpected places. I believe in second chances at happiness. He pulled out a photograph, held it up. This is Tim Minot, political consultant, married man, father, worked on your 2018 campaign. Another photo. This is you and Mr. Minot in Los Angeles, June 2018, having dinner. Both of you still married to other people at the time. He set down the photos and picked up what looked like financial statements. Now, most affairs are personal matters. Messy, painful for the families involved, but personal. Not my business, not Congress's business, not America's business. Except when you start paying your lover with campaign donations. Then it becomes everyone's business. Kennedy spread out dozens of FEC reports across the desk. The E Street Group, that's Mr. Minot's consulting firm. One-man operation, him and a laptop. And according to these Federal Election Commission filings, between April 2018 and November 2020, your campaign paid this firm $2,783,412. He let that number hang in the air. Let me give you some context. The average House campaign in Minnesota spends about $180,000 on consulting. Total consulting for everything. Digital strategy, polling, media buying, opposition research, event planning, the whole package. You paid one firm run by one man who happened to be your romantic partner 15 times that amount. Omar's attorney started to speak. Kennedy held up a hand. But let's look at the timeline because timing is everything in romance and in fraud. March 2018, first payment to E Street Group. $12,000, standard enough. Nothing suspicious. Then April, May, June, payments keep coming. Small amounts, reasonable amounts. He pulled out a timeline, laid it across the front of his desk where everyone could see. June 2018, you and Mr. Minot are first photographed together at a campaign event in Los Angeles. July, the payments increase. $21,000 for travel consultation. August, $34,000 for media strategy. September through December, $143,000 total. Kennedy traced his finger along the timeline. Then January 2019, something changes. The payments explode. $78,000 in 1 month. February, $63,000. March, $91,000. By the end of March 2019, you've paid this man over $200,000 in 3 months. He looked up at Omar. April 2019, you and Mr. Minot are photographed together in Hawaii, both still married to other people. May 2019, both of you file for divorce from your respective spouses. June 2019, you're holding hands in public at a campaign event. The affair is now public knowledge. Kennedy tapped the timeline. July 2019, you pay E Street Group $214,000 in 1 month. $214,000 to a one-man consulting firm run by your now public boyfriend. He sat back. Now, I'm no expert in the consulting business, but that seems excessive, so I did some research. I called around to other consulting firms, asked what they charge for services. Want to know what I found? He pulled out a comparison chart. A top-tier political consulting firm with a staff of 15, offices in 5 states, a track record of winning competitive races. They charge about $15,000 a month for full-service campaign management. That's everything. Strategy, media, digital, polling, events, crisis management, the works. Kennedy pointed at Omar's payments. You paid Tim Minot's one-man operation 14 times that rate. For what? What services did he provide that were worth $200,000 a month? Omar spoke for the first time in several minutes. Strategic consulting, travel, logistics, media coordination. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted, I have the invoices right here. Let me read you some of these line items. July 15, 2019. $26,000 for travel and logistics consultation for a trip to Africa. I can book a first-class trip to Africa, 5-star hotels, private drivers, the full luxury treatment for under $10,000. What happened to the other $16,000? He didn't wait for an answer. August 3, 2019. $38,000 for media strategy consultation. Ma'am, I hired a media strategy firm last cycle that handled everything. My TV ads, my digital presence, my crisis communications, for $12,000 for the entire campaign. You paid triple that for 1 month of consultation from a firm with no other clients and no track record. Kennedy pulled out bank records. But here's what really bothers me. These are bank records subpoenaed through proper legal channels. They show deposits from your campaign to E Street Group, and then within days, sometimes within hours, transfers from E Street Group to accounts that paid for personal expenses. Rent on an apartment where you both lived, plane tickets for personal travel, restaurant bills, hotel rooms. He looked up. You weren't paying for consulting, ma'am. You were laundering campaign funds to pay for your affair. That's not campaign finance violations. That's fraud. The room erupted again. Omar's face had gone pale. Her attorneys were frantically taking notes, but Kennedy wasn't done. Federal Election Commission regulations are very clear. Campaign funds cannot be used for personal expenses. They cannot be used to enrich the candidate. They cannot be used to pay for romantic relationships. Every dollar donated to your campaign was given by people who believed they were supporting your political work, not funding your love life. Kennedy pulled out a thick stack of what looked like invoices. I went through every single payment your campaign made to E Street Group. Every invoice, every receipt, every line item. Want to know what I found? 43 separate payments that appear to have been converted directly into personal expenses. 43 counts of campaign finance fraud. He laid them out, one by one. This payment for travel coordination. The records show it paid for a weekend trip to Los Angeles where no campaign events occurred. This payment for media consultation. It paid for an apartment lease in Washington, D.C. where you both lived. This payment for strategic advisory services. It paid for a vacation to Martha's Vineyard. Kennedy's voice got harder. You treated your campaign account like a personal piggy bank. You used donor money, money given by people who believed in you, who trusted you, who thought they were supporting a cause, and you spent it on yourself, on your boyfriend, on your affair. He pulled out one more document. This is a sworn statement from your campaign treasurer who resigned in August 2019. She says, and I'm reading directly, that she raised concerns about the payments to E Street Group. She says she was told by you personally that these were legitimate campaign expenses. She says when she pressed for documentation, you told her to mind her own business. Kennedy looked directly at Omar. She resigned because she didn't want to be part of fraud. She resigned because she knew what you were doing was illegal. She resigned because, unlike you, she actually has a conscience. He sat back. Campaign finance violations carry penalties of up to 5 years per violation. I count 43 violations. That's 215 years if the sentences run consecutively. Now they won't, but even if you serve concurrent sentences, we're talking about serious prison time. Kennedy closed the folder. But we're not done, not even close. Because while you were defrauding your campaign donors, you were also defrauding the American taxpayer with your tax returns. He reached for the third folder. Let's talk about perjury. The devastation on Omar's face was visible now. This wasn't going the way she'd expected. This wasn't a partisan attack she could deflect with accusations of racism or Islamophobia. This was methodical, documented, undeniable. And Kennedy was just getting started. Comment below if you think politicians should be held accountable, because what comes next gets even worse. Kennedy opened the third folder. This one marked simply tax documents in neat handwriting. But the way he handled it, carefully, almost reverently, suggested what was inside was anything but simple. Now, ma'am, I need to be very careful here, because what I'm about to discuss involves federal tax law, and tax law is complicated. More complicated than it needs to be if you ask me, but nobody asked me when they wrote the tax code. He pulled out forms, official IRS documents stamped with dates and signatures. These are your federal tax returns for the years 2014 and 2015, obtained legally through proper disclosure requirements for public officials, and they're fascinating reading, better than most novels I've tried to get through. Kennedy held up the first one. 2014. You filed jointly with Ahmed Hiasi. Remember him, your first husband, the one you had a faith ceremony with in 2002, the one you separated from in 2008. According to this return, you and Mr. Hiasi were married and living together in 2014. He set that down and picked up another document. Except these are marriage records from the state of Minnesota, and they show that in 2014 you were legally married to Ahmed Nursaid Elmi, not Ahmed Hiasi. Ahmed Elmi, your brother, the one you committed immigration fraud with. Kennedy removed his glasses, polished them again. It was becoming a signature move, this pause, this moment of theatrical consideration. So let me see if I have this right. In 2014, you were legally married to one man, your brother, for immigration purposes. But you filed joint tax returns with a different man, your ex-husband, for tax purposes. Ma'am, I'm no mathematician, but that doesn't add up. He pulled out more forms. 2015, same thing. Joint return with Ahmed Hiasi while legally married to Ahmed Elmi. 2 years of joint tax returns with someone you weren't legally married to. Kennedy leaned forward. Now here's why this matters. When you file a joint tax return, you get certain benefits. Lower tax rates, higher deductions, better exemptions. The IRS gives married couples filing jointly a significant advantage over single filers. But you have to actually be married to the person you're filing with. He tapped the forms. You weren't married to Ahmed Hiasi in 2014 and 2015. You were married to Ahmed Elmi, which means these joint returns are fraudulent, which means every deduction you claimed, every tax benefit you received, every dollar you saved by filing jointly, that's all theft from the American taxpayer. Omar's attorney was on his feet now. Senator, my client's personal tax returns are signed under penalty of perjury, Kennedy interrupted. Every tax return you file, there's a little box you sign, and right above that box it says, I declare under penalty of perjury that the information provided is true, correct, and complete. Your client signed that box, twice, for returns that were provably false. He pulled out a calculator, started punching in numbers. Let's do some math. Based on the income reported and the deductions claimed, filing jointly versus filing separately saved you approximately $19,000 in 2014 and $23,000 in 2015. That's $42,000 in fraudulent tax benefits. Kennedy set down the calculator. That's tax fraud, ma'am. That's making false statements on federal tax documents. That's perjury. And that's a felony that carries up to 3 years per count. You filed 2 fraudulent returns. That's 6 years. But he wasn't finished. He pulled out more documents, these ones marked with official seals. Now, tax fraud by itself would be bad enough, but let's look at your student loan applications during this same period, because this is where it gets really interesting. Kennedy spread out FAFSA forms, federal student loan applications dating from 2009 through 2012. Every year you applied for federal student loans, you had to fill out these forms, and on every single one there's a question about marital status. It's right here, question 24. Are you married? He pointed at the forms one by one. 2009 you checked single, 2010 single, 2011 single, 2012 single, 4 years of checking the single box. Kennedy looked up. Except you weren't single, you were married to Ahmed Elmi. You were married during this entire period. You just lied about it on federal financial aid applications. Omar started to speak, but Kennedy talked over her. Now, why would someone lie about being married on student loan applications? Let me explain. When you're married, the federal government counts your spouse's income and assets when calculating your financial aid eligibility. When you're single, they only count yours. By claiming to be single when you were actually married, you artificially increased your financial aid eligibility. He pulled out more calculations. Based on Ahmed Elmi's reported income during these years, if you had accurately reported being married, you would have received approximately $34,000 less in federal student loans and grants. That's $34,000 of federal money you received fraudulently by lying about your marital status. Kennedy set down the papers. That's federal loan fraud. That's making false statements on federal financial aid applications. Each false statement is a separate felony carrying up to 5 years. You made 4 false statements. That's 20 years. He reached for another stack of documents. But wait, as they say in those late-night commercials, there's more. Because while you were lying about being single on student loan applications and lying about who you were married to on tax returns, you were also signing immigration documents supporting Ahmed Elmi's claim to legal status based on being married to you. Kennedy spread out immigration forms. These are Ahmed Elmi's applications for various immigration benefits, adjustment of status, work authorization, travel documents. Every single one lists you as his spouse. Every single one includes your signature as supporting documentation. Every single one was used as evidence that his marriage to you was legitimate and should be the basis for his legal presence in the United States. He looked at Omar with something that might have been pity if it wasn't so cold. So let's review what we have. You signed immigration documents swearing you were married to Ahmed Elmi. You signed tax documents swearing you were married to Ahmed Hiasi. You signed student loan documents swearing you were single. Ma'am, they can't all be true. In fact, only one of them can be true, which means the other 2 are perjury. Kennedy pulled out a chart, a visual representation of the contradictions. 2009 through 2015, 6 years of contradicting official documents, 6 years of signing forms that say different things, 6 years of swearing under penalty of perjury to information that directly contradicts other information you swore was true. He pointed at the chart. This isn't a mistake. This isn't confusion about complicated laws. This is a systematic pattern of fraud. You signed whatever documents said whatever you needed them to say to get whatever benefits you were seeking at that moment. Immigration benefits. Sign here saying you're married to Elmi. Tax benefits. Sign here saying you're married to Hiasi. Student loan benefits. Sign here saying you're single. Kennedy's voice got very quiet. You committed perjury at least 6 times on federal documents. Tax returns, immigration forms, financial aid applications. Each one is a separate felony. Each one carries prison time. Each one is documented, signed, dated, undeniable. He closed the folder. But here's what really bothers me about this, ma'am. Every one of these frauds, every single one, involved stealing from the American people. Tax fraud, you stole from taxpayers. Loan fraud, you stole from federal education funding. Immigration fraud, you stole from legitimate immigrants waiting in line to enter this country legally. Kennedy stood up, walked to where Omar sat frozen at the witness table. America gave you refuge when you had nothing. America gave you education when you needed it. America gave you opportunity when you sought it, and you repaid that generosity by defrauding every system that helped you. The tax system, the education system, the immigration system. You didn't just break the law, ma'am. You broke faith with the country that saved your life. He walked back to his seat. Perjury, tax fraud, student loan fraud, immigration fraud, each one documented, each one provable, each one a federal felony. The sentences add up, ma'am, they add up fast. Kennedy reached for the fourth folder. But we're only halfway through. Because while you were busy committing domestic fraud, you were also making some very interesting friends overseas. Let's talk about your relationships with foreign governments. The color had completely drained from Omar's face. Her attorneys were whispering so frantically now they were almost hissing. But Kennedy just smiled that small smile and opened the folder marked Foreign Contacts. And everyone in the room knew the worst was yet to come. This is the moment it became clear Omar wasn't just in trouble. She was finished. Share this if you believe America deserves better than corrupt politicians. Kennedy pulled out a world map, the kind you'd see in a high school classroom, except this one had been marked up extensively. Red pins, blue pins, dates written in neat handwriting. Representative Omar, do you remember where you were on March 14, 2017? Omar's response was cautious. I would need to check my schedule from that time. Doha, Qatar, Kennedy interrupted. You were in Doha, meeting with officials from the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's documented right here in travel records your office filed, though interestingly, not in your financial disclosure forms. He pulled out disclosure forms, held them up. Federal law requires members of Congress to disclose all meetings with foreign government officials. It's right there in the Ethics in Government Act. Every meeting, every contact, every substantial communication with representatives of foreign nations. You're required to report them. Kennedy spread out Omar's disclosure forms from 2017 through 2020. These are your forms. I've gone through them very carefully. And you know what's interesting? The Qatar meetings aren't listed. The Turkey meetings aren't listed. Most of your foreign contacts aren't listed. He pulled out travel manifests, customs records, hotel reservations. But they happened. March 2017, Qatar. April 2017, Turkey. May 2017, Qatar again. June, Turkey. July, Qatar. Between January 2017 and December 2020, you met with Qatari government officials 17 times and Turkish government officials 21 times. Kennedy let that number settle. 21 times, ma'am. You met with representatives of a foreign government 21 times. And you didn't disclose a single one of those meetings. He pulled out what looked like a voting record. Now, let's look at what you voted on regarding Turkey. This is interesting. February 2019, resolution condemning Turkey's human rights violations. You voted no. May 2019, sanctions on Turkey for purchasing Russian weapons systems. You voted no. June 2019, resolution supporting Kurdish allies against Turkish aggression. You voted no. Kennedy set down the voting record and picked up another one. Qatar. April 2019, increased scrutiny on Qatari financing of terrorist organizations. You voted no. September 2019, sanctions on Qatar for human rights abuses. You voted no. November 2019, resolution condemning Qatari support for Hamas. You voted no. He looked up at Omar. Out of 28 substantive votes involving Turkey or Qatar, you voted against American policy positions 26 times. That's a 93% opposition rate to United States foreign policy interests regarding these two countries. Kennedy pulled out a chart showing her voting record compared to other members with similar districts. This is representative from Michigan, similar demographic makeup to your district, significant Muslim population, progressive politics. On Turkey and Qatar votes, he aligned with U.S. interests 87% of the time. Another chart. This is representative from New Jersey, again similar district. She aligned with U.S. interests 82% of the time. Kennedy pointed at Omar's chart. You aligned with U.S. interests 7% of the time. 7%. You voted with Turkish and Qatari interests 93% of the time. He set down the charts and pulled out what looked like emails, official correspondence. These are communications between your office and organizations connected to Turkish lobbying efforts. They came to me through official channels after a whistleblower in your office became concerned about what they were seeing. Kennedy put on his reading glasses. Let me read you one. This is from your foreign policy advisor to a representative of an organization with documented ties to Turkish intelligence services. Quote, Congresswoman Omar's position on the Syria question aligns with President Erdogan's vision for regional stability. We believe there are opportunities for coordination on messaging. End quote. He looked up. Ma'am, when your staff is coordinating messaging with foreign intelligence services, that's not foreign policy. That's being a foreign agent. Omar's attorney was standing again. Senator, you're making serious. I'm reading emails sent from official congressional accounts, Kennedy said calmly. Emails that discuss coordination with foreign governments on policy positions. That's not allegation. That's documentation. He pulled out bank records. But let's talk about money, because following the money is always interesting. These are campaign finance records showing donations to your campaign. I've highlighted ones from individuals with documented connections to Turkish and Qatari influence networks. Kennedy spread out dozens of pages, each with highlighted sections. $432,000. That's the total amount your campaign received from individuals connected to Turkish and Qatari influence operations. Now, individually, these donations are under the legal limit. $2,800 here, $5,000 there, all perfectly legal on the surface. He pulled out a chart showing the pattern of donations. But look at the timing. March 2019, you vote against Turkey sanctions. That same week, you receive $43,000 in donations from individuals connected to Turkish influence networks. May 2019, you vote against Qatar accountability measures. Within 10 days, $67,000 from Qatar-connected donors. Kennedy tapped the chart. This is what prosecutors call a pattern. Vote the way foreign governments want, receive donations from people connected to those governments. That's not coincidence, ma'am. That's a quid pro quo. He pulled out what looked like travel expenses. But it's not just donations. These are records showing trips you took that were funded by organizations with ties to Turkish and Qatari government entities. March 2018, a trip to Istanbul funded by an organization that was later revealed to have direct connections to Turkish intelligence. August 2019, a trip to Doha funded by an educational foundation that's actually a front for the Qatari government. Kennedy looked at the expense reports. Total value of these trips, approximately $218,000, all paid for by foreign-connected organizations, all undisclosed on your financial forms, all in violation of federal law regarding foreign gifts to government officials. He set down the travel expenses and pulled out a thick document. This is the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA. It requires anyone who acts on behalf of foreign governments or entities to register as a foreign agent. The penalties for violation are up to 5 years in prison and fines. Kennedy opened the document to a marked page. The definition of acting as a foreign agent includes engaging in political activities, public relations work, or lobbying on behalf of a foreign principal. It includes anyone who solicits, collects, or disperses contributions or loans for foreign principals. He looked at Omar. Ma'am, you've done all of that. You've advocated for Turkish and Qatari government positions. You've voted in alignment with their interests. You've coordinated messaging with their representatives. You've received funding from their networks. You've taken trips they paid for. And you never registered as a foreign agent. Kennedy closed the document. That's a FARA violation. That's acting on behalf of foreign governments without proper disclosure. That's a federal felony. He pulled out one more set of documents. But here's what really concerns me. These are intelligence assessments, declassified summaries provided to this committee, showing Turkish and Qatari influence operations in the United States. They identify you, Representative Omar, as a person of interest in these operations. They document meetings you had with individuals known to be intelligence officers. They show communications between Turkish government officials discussing you as an asset. Kennedy held up the documents. Ma'am, American intelligence agencies believe you've been compromised by foreign governments. They believe you're actively working to advance foreign interests over American interests. And based on everything I've seen today, I believe they're right. The room erupted. Shouting, chaos, cameras flashing. Omar looked like she might be sick. Her attorneys were gathering papers, preparing what looked like a hasty exit strategy. Kennedy just sat there, waiting for order to be restored. When the room finally quieted, he spoke one more time. Failure to register as a foreign agent carries up to 5 years. Each undisclosed foreign contact is a separate ethics violation. Each undisclosed gift is a separate violation of federal law. Each vote cast in coordination with foreign interests is a betrayal of your oath of office. He stacked the documents neatly. But we're not done. We have 2 more folders. One about your public statements regarding American foreign policy and American allies, and one about your pattern of anti-Semitic rhetoric that's created a hostile environment for Jewish Americans. Kennedy reached for the 5th folder. Let's talk about your views on Israel and the Jewish people. The look of resignation on Omar's face suggested she knew exactly how bad this was about to get. And she was right. Keep watching, because Kennedy was about to dismantle every defense she'd ever used. Kennedy opened the 5th folder slowly, deliberately. When he spoke, his voice had lost its earlier conversational tone. This was different, more serious. Representative Omar, I'm about to discuss something very difficult. Something that goes beyond fraud, beyond corruption, beyond even foreign influence. I'm going to discuss hatred, and I want to be very clear about something before I start. He paused, making sure everyone in the room was paying attention. Criticizing the Israeli government is not anti-Semitism. Disagreeing with Israeli policy is not anti-Semitism. Supporting Palestinian rights is not anti-Semitism. I need to establish that clearly because I don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm about to say. Kennedy pulled out what looked like a timeline, printed large enough to be visible from across the room. But what you've done, ma'am, goes far beyond policy criticism. What you've done is invoke age-old anti-Semitic tropes, conspiracy theories that have gotten Jewish people killed for centuries. And you've done it from a position of power with a national platform, knowing full well the impact your words would have. He pointed at the first entry on the timeline. November 2012, before you were in Congress, you tweeted, and I quote, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel." And he set down his pointer. Hypnotized. That word has a very specific meaning in the context of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It implies control, secret, sinister control. It's the same language used in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a fabricated text that's been used to justify pogroms, persecution, and ultimately the Holocaust. He pulled out a report from the Anti-Defamation League. This organization has been tracking anti-Semitic rhetoric for over 100 years. They have an entire database of classic anti-Semitic tropes, and hypnotizing the world or controlling world events through secret means is literally listed as one of the foundational elements of modern anti-Semitism. Kennedy looked at Omar. Now, maybe in 2012 you didn't know that. Maybe you were just using inflammatory language without understanding the historical context. So let's move forward. Did you learn? He pointed at the next entry. February 2019, you're now in Congress. You tweet in response to a discussion about U.S.-Israel relations. It's all about the Benjamin's baby. Kennedy pulled out that tweet blown up poster size. For anyone who doesn't understand the reference, Benjamins means $100 bills. You were suggesting that support for Israel is all about money, all about Jewish money buying influence. That's not policy criticism, ma'am. That's invoking the ancient stereotype of Jewish people and money, the same stereotype that's been used to justify persecution for millennia. He pulled out responses to that tweet, printed out, highlighted. Members of your own party called you out. Chelsea Clinton, hardly a conservative, said your tweet trafficked in anti-Semitic tropes. Leadership in your own party demanded you apologize. Kennedy found her apology statement. And you did apologize, sort of. You said, anti-Semitism is real and I am grateful for Jewish allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes. Past tense. Educating, as if the lesson was complete, as if you'd learned and would do better. He pulled out more tweets, more statements. March 2019, you suggested that supporters of Israel have allegiance to a foreign country. That's the dual loyalty smear, ma'am. The accusation that Jewish Americans aren't truly American, that they're more loyal to Israel than to the United States. That's been used to justify excluding Jewish people from positions of power, from government service, from public life. Kennedy set down the statements and pulled out data. Let me show you the impact of your words. These are hate crime statistics from the NYPD. 2017, before you took office, there were 153 reported anti-Semitic hate crimes in New York City. 2018, your election year, 189. 2019, your first year in office, 274. He let those numbers hang in the air. 2020, 336 anti-Semitic hate crimes in New York City alone, a 119% increase from 2017 to 2020. Now, I'm not saying you caused all of that, but when someone with a national platform normalizes anti-Semitic rhetoric, when you make it acceptable to talk about Jews hypnotizing the world and buying influence, you create an atmosphere where hate flourishes. Kennedy pulled out testimonies, statements from rabbis, from Jewish community leaders. This is from Rabbi Michael Adam Latz in Minneapolis, your own district. He testified that after your Benjamin's tweet, his synagogue received 23 threats in 2 weeks. Before your tweet, they averaged 1 threat per year. 1 threat per year became 23 threats in 2 weeks. Another testimony. This is from a Jewish family in your district. Their teenager was assaulted at school, called a dirty Jew, told he was hypnotizing people just like Omar said. The attackers specifically cited your language as justification for their violence. Kennedy's voice got harder. You can't separate rhetoric from consequences, ma'am. When you use language that invokes centuries-old hatred, people listen, and some of those people act. He pulled out a list. This is every time you've been asked to specifically, unequivocally condemn anti-Semitic violence without equivocation. 7 occasions. 7 times you were given the opportunity to simply say, I condemn anti-Semitic violence, period. Kennedy read through the list. Every single time you added a qualifier. I condemn anti-Semitism, but we must also address Islamophobia. I condemn hate, but we must also acknowledge. Every single time, you couldn't bring yourself to condemn anti-Semitic violence without deflecting to something else. He set down the list. Ma'am, when Jewish children are being attacked on the streets because of rhetoric like yours, but what about is not an appropriate response. When synagogues are being threatened, when Jewish families are afraid to wear yarmulkes in public, when anti-Semitic violence is at historic highs, you don't get to both sides it. Kennedy pulled out voting records. Let's look at your votes on Israel. Resolutions supporting Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas rockets. You voted no. Funding for Iron Dome, a purely defensive system designed to protect civilians from missile attacks. You voted no. Resolution condemning Hamas for using human shields. You voted no. He spread out the records. Out of 17 substantive votes regarding Israel, you voted against Israel 17 times, 100% opposition. But let's look at your votes regarding other countries accused of human rights violations. Kennedy pulled out more records. China, currently engaging in genocide against Uyghur Muslims. You voted against sanctioning China 3 times out of 8 opportunities. Syria, where Assad has killed hundreds of thousands. You voted against sanctions twice out of 6 opportunities. Iran, which funds terrorism throughout the Middle East and oppresses its own people. You voted against sanctions 4 times out of 9 opportunities. He looked up. So for China, Syria, and Iran, countries with documented human rights abuses, you sometimes vote for accountability, sometimes don't. But for Israel, 100% opposition. The only democracy in the Middle East, the only country in the region where Muslims, Christians, and Jews have equal rights under law, and you oppose every single measure supporting them. Kennedy pulled out one more document. This is a letter signed by 87 rabbis from across the political spectrum. Reform, conservative, orthodox, reconstructionist. Progressive rabbis, moderate rabbis, conservative rabbis. All asking you to meet with them to discuss your rhetoric and its impact on their communities. He held up the letter. 87 religious leaders representing hundreds of thousands of Jewish Americans. You never responded. You never met with them. You never even acknowledged receiving the letter. Kennedy set it down. But you had time for 21 meetings with Turkish officials. You had time for 17 meetings with Qatari representatives. You had time for photo ops with activists who call for Israel's destruction. But you couldn't find time for rabbis from your own country trying to explain why your words are dangerous. He pulled out social media posts, dozens of them. These are your Twitter interactions. I had my staff analyze who you engage with on social media. You've retweeted or engaged positively with accounts that openly call for Israel's destruction 47 times. Accounts that use Nazi imagery to describe Israelis, accounts that promote Holocaust denial, accounts that celebrate terrorism against Israeli civilians. Kennedy spread them out. You've amplified anti-Semitic voices, given them credibility by associating your platform with theirs. When someone with 900,000 Twitter followers shares content from an account that celebrates dead Jews, that's not policy criticism. That's promoting hate. He pulled out a final document. This is a compilation of statements from organizations across the political spectrum. The Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, J Street, AIPAC, even Jewish Voice for Peace, which is critical of Israel, all of them, every major Jewish organization in America, has issued statements condemning your rhetoric. Kennedy held up the compilation. When literally every organized Jewish group in America, from the far left to the far right, when they all agree that your rhetoric crosses a line, maybe the problem isn't that they're all wrong. Maybe the problem is you. He closed the folder. You're not being persecuted for criticizing Israel, ma'am. You're being held accountable for invoking anti-Semitic tropes that have led to violence. You're being called out for making Jewish Americans less safe in their own country. You're being condemned for giving aid and comfort to anti-Semites who use your words to justify their hatred. Kennedy's voice got very quiet. My grandfather used to tell me about the Holocaust. He was part of the liberation of Dachau. He saw the camps, the bodies, the walking skeletons of survivors. He saw what happened when anti-Semitic rhetoric was allowed to flourish unchecked. When people with power said Jews controlled the world, Jews bought influence, Jews weren't truly loyal to their countries. He paused. That rhetoric led to genocide, 6 million dead, and here you are, 75 years later, using that same rhetoric from a position of power in the United States Congress. Kennedy stood up. You don't get to hide behind policy disagreements anymore. You don't get to claim criticism of Israel as cover for anti-Semitism. You don't get to invoke ancient hatreds and then play victim when people call you out. He gathered his papers. House resolution condemning anti-Semitism that was passed in response to your comments. You voted present. You couldn't even vote yes on a resolution condemning the kind of hatred you'd been promoting. That tells me everything about where you stand. Kennedy reached for the sixth and final folder. But we have one more topic to discuss. Let's talk about September 11th and your views on terrorism. The absolute silence in the room suggested everyone knew this would be the devastating final blow. Share this if you believe Congress should have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism. Kennedy held the final folder in his hands but didn't open it immediately. He just sat there, staring at it like a man preparing to discuss something almost too painful to speak about. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different. The strategic prosecutor was gone. This was personal. Representative Omar, where were you on September 11th, 2001? Omar's voice was quiet. I was in high school in Minneapolis. I was in a courtroom in Baton Rouge, Kennedy said. We were in session, criminal trial, armed robbery case if I remember right. Someone ran in, told us a plane had hit the World Trade Center in New York. We thought it was an accident. Small plane, navigational error, tragic but accidental. Then the second plane hit. He paused. We turned on the television in the judge's chambers. All of us, judge, attorneys, bailiffs, clerks, all crowded around this little TV, and we watched. We watched the towers burn. We watched people jumping from windows because burning alive was worse. We watched the South Tower collapse, then the North Tower. We watched the Pentagon burning. We learned about the plane in Pennsylvania where passengers fought back, where Americans died stopping another attack. Kennedy's voice was steady, but there was emotion underneath. I watched all of that, ma'am. I watched America change in real time. I watched 3,000 of my fellow citizens murdered in a single morning. Murdered by terrorists who hated everything America stands for. He opened the folder. So you can imagine my interest when I read the speech you gave at the Council on American-Islamic Relations in March 2019. The speech where you discussed September 11th. Want to know what you said? Kennedy pulled out a transcript. You said, and I'm reading your exact words, CAIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. He set down the transcript. Some people did something. That's how you described September 11th. Some people did something. like they cut in line at the grocery store, like they got a parking ticket, like they did something mildly inconvenient. Some people did something. Kennedy's voice rose for the first time in the entire hearing. 19 al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 commercial aircraft and murdered 2,977 Americans. They flew planes into buildings full of people. They killed firefighters and police officers who ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. They killed secretaries and stockbrokers and janitors and executives and tourists and people from 90 different countries who were in America because America represented hope and opportunity and freedom. He pulled out photos, large photos, and began laying them out across his desk. Photos of the towers burning, photos of first responders covered in ash, photos of the devastation. These are the people who did something, ma'am. These are the Americans who died that day. These are the heroes who ran into burning buildings. These are the families who lost mothers and fathers and daughters and sons. Kennedy pulled out another document. I looked at your other statements about terrorism, just to see if maybe you spoke casually about all tragedies. Maybe you just weren't precise with language. So I pulled your statement about the Christchurch mosque shooting. Want to know what you said? He read from the document. You said, and I quote, terrorism rooted in white supremacy massacred 50 innocent Muslims. Specific, clear. You named the perpetrators white supremacists. You named their ideology. You called it what it was, terrorism and massacre. Another document. Your statement on the El Paso shooting. White nationalist terrorism killed 23 people in a racist attack. Again, specific. You identified the terrorists, their ideology, their crime. Kennedy looked up. But September 11th. Some people did something. Not al-Qaeda terrorists, not radical Islamic extremists, not murderers who hijacked planes and committed mass murder, just some people doing something. He pulled out testimonies, statements from 9/11 families, first responders, survivors. This is from a widow whose husband died in the North Tower. She wrote, I spent 18 years trying to explain to my children how their father died. I've struggled with words like terrorist and murder and evil. But now a member of Congress has given me new language. Some people did something. Should I tell my children that some people did something to their daddy? Kennedy read more statements, one after another, from firefighters who pulled bodies from rubble, from police officers who ran toward the towers, from EMTs who treated people they knew they couldn't save. Every one of them expressing betrayal, pain, anger at Omar's minimization of what happened that day. You know what else is interesting? Kennedy pulled out more research. I checked the founding date of CAIR, the organization you were speaking to. You said CAIR was founded after 9/11. That's what you said. But CAIR was actually founded in 1994, 7 years before September 11th. So not only did you minimize the worst terrorist attack in American history, you did it while lying about an organization that has had multiple officials convicted of terrorism-related charges. He pulled out DOJ documents. These are Justice Department records showing CAIR officials convicted of providing material support to terrorism. Federal prosecutors have described CAIR as having connections to Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. And you were giving a speech praising them, lying about when they were founded, minimizing 9/11, all in one moment. Kennedy leaned forward. After your statement sparked nationwide outrage, did you apologize? Did you meet with 9/11 families? Did you meet with first responders? Did you issue a clear, unambiguous statement saying, I was wrong, I minimized a tragedy, I'm sorry? He answered his own question. No, you released a statement saying you were being taken out of context. You claimed the controversy was manufactured by your political enemies. You played victim instead of taking responsibility. Kennedy pulled out video footage. I have the full video of your speech. I've watched it multiple times. Want to know what context makes some people did something appropriate when discussing mass murder? There isn't any. There's no context where that minimization is acceptable. He set down the video transcript. But this isn't just about one statement. This is about a pattern. Let's look at your record on terrorism. Kennedy pulled out voting records. September 2019, resolution condemning al-Qaeda on the anniversary of September 11th. Simple, ceremonial, we do it every year. 430 members voted yes. 5 voted present, you were one of them. You couldn't even vote yes on condemning al-Qaeda on September 11th. Another vote. October 2019, Resolution supporting Kurdish forces who fought ISIS alongside American troops. You voted no. You were one of 3 members who voted no. Those Kurdish fighters bled with Americans, died fighting the same terrorists who want to kill Americans. You voted to abandon them. More votes. Resolution condemning Hamas for using human shields. You voted no. Resolution condemning Hezbollah for terrorism. You voted no. Resolution supporting counterterrorism operations against ISIS. You voted no. Kennedy spread out the votes. Out of 19 votes related to combating terrorism or supporting allies in the fight against terrorism, you voted no or present 17 times. 89% opposition to counterterrorism measures. He pulled out statements, speeches Omar had given. This is from a speech at a university in 2019. You compared American soldiers to terrorists. You said, "We have to make sure that we are not equating people who are defending themselves from war crimes with the people committing the war crimes." You were talking about terrorists, ma'am. You were defending terrorists by claiming they were just defending themselves. Kennedy's voice got hard. American soldiers don't deliberately target civilians. Terrorists do. American soldiers follow rules of engagement. Terrorists strap bombs to children. American soldiers risk their lives to avoid civilian casualties. Terrorists maximize them, and you compared our soldiers to them. He pulled out more statements. You've called American foreign policy imperialist 17 times in public statements. You've suggested America has no moral authority to criticize other nations 14 times. You've called for cutting aid to Israel 32 times while never calling for cutting aid to countries that actually sponsor terrorism. Kennedy pulled out intelligence assessments. These are declassified summaries from intelligence agencies showing terrorist organizations using your statements in recruitment materials. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, they quote you. They use your words about American imperialism, about American soldiers being terrorists, about some people doing something on 9/11. They use your words to recruit people to kill Americans. He held up the assessments. Your rhetoric, ma'am, appears in terrorist propaganda. Your minimization of 9/11, your comparison of American soldiers to terrorists, your consistent opposition to counterterrorism measures, it's all being used by our enemies to justify their hatred of America. Kennedy set down the documents and stood up. So let me ask you directly, Representative Omar, do you believe the 19 men who hijacked those planes on September 11, 2001 were terrorists? Do you believe they committed an act of evil? Do you believe they murdered innocent Americans? Or do you believe they were just some people who did something? The room was silent. Every eye was on Omar. She sat there, pale, shaking slightly, her attorneys whispering urgently in her ears, but she didn't answer. Kennedy waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30. I'll note for the record that Representative Omar declined to answer that question. He gathered all his folders, stacked them neatly on his desk. Let me summarize what we've established here today. Marriage fraud, campaign finance fraud, tax fraud, student loan fraud, perjury, foreign agent violations, ethics violations, anti-Semitic rhetoric that's led to violence, minimization of terrorism, opposition to American interests, coordination with foreign governments, acceptance of foreign money, consistent advocacy for America's enemies. Kennedy picked up the entire stack of evidence, 4 inches thick. This isn't politics, this isn't partisan warfare, this isn't persecution. This is documentation, evidence, facts, your own words, your own signatures, your own votes, your own statements. He looked directly at Omar. You came to America as a refugee. America gave you safety, education, opportunity. You were elected to Congress, given power and a platform. And you used all of that to defraud the American people, to advocate for foreign governments, to spread hatred, to minimize terrorism, to enrich yourself and your romantic partners. Kennedy's voice was quiet now, but it carried to every corner of the room. You betrayed every trust. You violated every oath. You corrupted every office you held. And you did it all while hiding behind identity politics, claiming that anyone who questioned you was racist or Islamophobic. He set down the stack of evidence. But evidence isn't racist. Bank statements aren't Islamophobic. Immigration records don't have political agendas. The truth doesn't care about your identity or your victim narrative. The truth just is. Kennedy addressed the committee. I move that this committee immediately refer all findings to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. I move that we recommend Representative Omar's immediate removal from all committee assignments. I move that we refer all ethics violations to the House Ethics Committee with a recommendation for expulsion. And I move that we release this entire record to the public because the American people have a right to know exactly who they elected. The vote was unanimous. Every member of the committee, Republican and Democrat, voted yes. No dissent. No abstentions. Unanimous. Kennedy looked at Omar one final time. Representative Omar, you're dismissed. I'd say it's been enlightening, but honestly it's just been sad. Sad that someone given so much chose to give back so little. Sad that corruption wore the mask of social justice. Sad that America's generosity was repaid with betrayal. He closed his final folder. This hearing is adjourned. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Within hours, the video was trending on every social media platform. Within 24 hours, 50 million views. Within 48 hours, 100 million. People who'd never watched congressional hearings were sharing clips, marveling at the methodical destruction, the overwhelming evidence, the complete dismantling of every defense Omar had ever used. Progressive Democrats who defended her went silent. Moderate Democrats called for her resignation. Even some of her squad allies quietly distanced themselves. The evidence was too overwhelming, too documented, too undeniable. Nancy Pelosi, in a press conference that looked physically painful for her, announced that Omar would be stripped of committee assignments pending investigations. The House Ethics Committee voted unanimously for expulsion proceedings. The Department of Justice opened multiple criminal investigations. The FBI started interviewing witnesses. 3 grand juries were convened in 3 different jurisdictions. Omar hired law firms, burned through campaign funds, filed motions to dismiss. Every motion was denied. The evidence was too strong. Polling in her district collapsed. 73% wanted her to resign. A primary challenger announced within days. Donors fled. Organizations rescinded endorsements. Foreign officials who'd met with her claimed they couldn't recall her name. The indictments came 3 months later. 18 federal counts, multiple state charges, potential prison time measured in decades. Legal experts gave her a 5% chance at acquittal. Plea deal negotiations began. But perhaps the most telling moment came 6 months later. A reporter caught Kennedy leaving the Capitol, asked him about the hearing. Kennedy stopped, turned, smiled that small smile. "The truth doesn't need spin or follow-up or clarification," he said. "It just needs to be spoken with evidence, with precision, with courage." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and keep your receipts, folks. Always keep your receipts." That clip got another 10 million views. Because Senator John Kennedy had proven something that day. Something that resonated across party lines, across ideologies, across the bitter divisions of American politics. He proved that corruption, no matter how it dresses itself up, no matter what identity it hides behind, no matter how loudly it screams about persecution, corruption can't withstand evidence. It can't survive documentation. It can't escape the truth. And when someone has the courage to present that truth, armed with 4 inches of evidence and blessed with a Louisiana drawl that makes devastating facts sound almost polite, corruption crumbles. Not because of anger, not because of partisanship, not because of tweets or viral moments, but because of receipts, documentation, evidence. The boring, unglamorous work of building a case so airtight that no amount of deflection, no claims of discrimination, no victim cards could puncture it. Share this story if you believe America deserves representatives who actually represent America, not themselves, not foreign powers, not their own bank accounts, just America, the country that gave Ilhan Omar everything, the country she betrayed, the country that in the end held her accountable. Because in America no one is above the law. Kennedy's receipts proved it, and the whole country watched.